The vote by Crimeans to be a part of Russia has the West wringing its hands. We're going to use it for a history lesson. We'll look at the just war theory and what hypocrisy exists in American history regarding taking other people's lands. This is the voice of resistance.
Standing for truth in the four corners of America. Fighting for justice on the frontiers of the culture wars. And turning resistance into an art form. Randall Terry.
For the next few days, the world, the media, yea, verily, even this program, we will focus on Crimea, at least in part. And in some ways, it's a study in history, study in self-government, maybe a little bit of study of self-war, clearly a study in hypocrisy. So before I look at the details, please, let me say this. We owe Russia a debt of gratitude for the annexation of Crimea in 1783. Yes, in 1783, the very year that the American insurrectionists, the American rebels, annexed large tracts of land and took them away from the crown of Great Britain, took away 13 colonies from the Parliament of Great Britain. In 1783, the Russian Tsarina, Catherine the Great, she annexed Crimea to Russia. And we owe her a debt of gratitude. In case you don't know, at that time, the Russian people were involved, as were many other Christian peoples, were involved with an ongoing struggle with the Ottoman Empire. And the Muslim Tartars of Crimea had a loose association with the Muslim tyrants of the Ottoman Empire. And Crimea was used as a base for large kidnapping raids, where the devout Muslim men would leave Crimea and would kidnap Christian people and sell them as slaves. And that was part of the motivation that inspired Catherine the Great during the Russo-Turkish War, and then ultimately resulting in the annexation of Crimea. Now, and we owe them a debt of gratitude. And I want to personally thank Catherine the Great for helping break the back of the kidnapping and slave trade that went on for years under the leadership of devout Muslim men. Let's define the word annexation, shall we? According to one of the online dictionaries I looked at, it says, the action of annexing something, especially territory, seizure, occupation, invasion, conquest, takeover, appropriation. Now, later on in the program, we will take a look at the different tracts of land that the United States annexed, okay? There's such a sordid history in the United States. The hypocrisy that we are displaying at this time at our State Department is almost laughable. But before we go there, I would like to point out that there was a vote in the Crimean Parliament to allow a vote, right? The Crimean Parliament said, we're going to break away from the Ukraine. The Russian troops that are on the ground there, well, there was already a treaty for Russia to have a certain number of troops. Looks like they exceeded that number, but nevertheless, it wasn't a conquest. There wasn't a lot of bloodshed. And there was a vote, folks. By every account, over 95% of the people of Crimea said, we are going, or at least those who voted said, we're going back to Russia. Back to Russia. And while all of this hand-wringing is going on at the State Department, I want to point out to you that we may have a new nation bordering us. Did you ever think about that? You do understand that Quebec is in its pursuit, again, of independence from Canada. We could have a new nation to our northern border very shortly. And if Quebec is successful in pulling out of Canada, there are other provinces among the 10 provinces of Canada that also have secessionist movements. They want to secede from Canada. I don't see us up in arms about that, although if we do have another nation to our north and they decide to follow a different foreign policy with some of the people that we are historically at odds with, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll look at some of the other votes that are going on in the very near future involving secession. The United States isn't all worked up about those. And we'll look at some of our own sordid history. And then maybe John Kerry can not embarrass us so much. I'll take a break. I promise I'll be back. This is the Voice of Resistance.
You have two choices. I mean, you can try to raise your children by design, or you will raise them by default. There are no perfect parents. We're going to get it wrong sometimes. If we have a plan, we've got a better chance of getting it right in the long run.
There is something deep within the heart of every human being that longs for parental acceptance and approval. When does a boy become a man?
Get a group of guys around and ask them that question.
I don't think there's a certain age. Some men stay boys their whole life.
I would say, 16, 18 years old.
Wow, that's a good question.
When they get bar mitzvah?
Well, I think when he has a child. So I just became at 56, 56 years old.
Without the power of the Holy Spirit changing us and giving us power over our sin, we can't hope to be the dads that our kids need us to be.
Did you know that one of the key reasons that the Americas were able to annex the land that we currently call the United States of America from its rightful owners, the British Crown? I'm saying all this tongue-in-cheek, by the way. But one of the reasons that we were able to prevail was because of Scotland. Yes, Scotland. There was a very key battle, the Battle of Culloden, that happened in the mid-1740s, okay? And the British forces went into the Highlands and surprised Bonnie Prince Charles and the Highlanders and decimated the Scottish army. That was really the last gasp on a military sense of Scotland maintaining its independence from the British Crown. If you're a fan of Braveheart, the movie, Mel Gibson's movie, or if you are a student of history, you would enjoy reading about William Wallace. One of our sons is named after William Wallace, the great Scottish freedom fighter. Anyway, when the Scots were defeated at the Battle of Culloden, many of the men they fled to America, okay, and settled in the Carolinas predominantly. But they had a deep and abiding hatred of the British. One of our original American leaders, and his name slips my mind, forgive me, he spent 2 years in the British Navy after the defeated Culloden, just so he could learn their tactics. Then he emigrated to America, again, with a deep and abiding hatred of the British. And so a lot of the motivation of the colonists, certainly from those who were of Scottish descent, was that we're going to fight the battle of our dads, okay? This is a payback fight for what happened in Scotland at the Battle of Culloden. Fast forward more than 250 years. The Scottish people are still clamoring for independence. Do you realize that we are on the verge right now of a vote in Scotland, a referendum, such as just happened in Crimea, to separate from the British Crown? I don't see the U.S. up in arms about that. And the British are not happy. They've said to the Scots, if you leave the empire, you may not use the British pound, our currency. I'm not sure how the British would stop them any more than certain nations around the world that are in de facto using the dollar as their currency. We're not really able to stop them if they've got the dollars in their hands or if they've got the British crown in their hands. I don't know how they'll be able to be stopped. Nevertheless, you've got that vote coming up very quickly. You've got the Quebec vote coming up very quickly. Venice, the city in Italy, the Venetian Empire existed for 1,000 years. And if my memory is correct, Napoleon deposed one of the leaders, and then after the Napoleonic Wars, Venice was basically absorbed into modern Italy. And there are people there who want Venice to be its own republic again. And there's a vote coming up. Do we scream our lungs out? Do we threaten economic sanctions against Scotland? Do we threaten economic sanctions against Quebec or against Venice? This is in part due to the fact that Western nations fear Russian expansionism, fear the attempt of Putin and other Soviet leaders to retake lands that were lost after the breakup of the Soviet Union. All right, the Baltic states, Poland. And I will grant you that there should be concern as to whether or not Russia tries to invade Ukraine. Crimea is one thing. They have their deep water port there, at Sevastopol. The Black Sea Fleet is based there. There's no way that Russia is going to give up Crimea. It's not going to happen. And I would submit to you that Western nations do not possess any just war theory under which they could fight Russia for Crimea. Now, Ukraine, that's another matter. And I guarantee you right now that that is what has the Western powers more alarmed. Do they arm Poland with nuclear weapons if Ukraine falls into Soviet hands by force? I don't know. Let's take a quick look when we come back at a couple more of these details. And I'm doing this, frankly, friends, because I enjoy the study of history. And you know what? When we come back, let's look at the just war theory that comes right out of the Catholic Catechism and see if we would have grounds to launch a war against Russia over Crimea. This is the Voice of Resistance. Do you want to have knowledge, wisdom, discernment? If so, you have to read good books on theology, history, books that look at the lives of great men and women. So to help you to become a more effective Christian, a better witness for truth, somebody who can engage in productive conversation that exhorts and edifies those that you speak with, we're going to do something crazy. We're offering you these 7 books for a gift of any size. You just pay for the shipping and handling, and then give whatever gift that you can, and we will send them to you. But just to make it a little bit more crazy, I will send you a second copy of my 3 books, autographed. You can give them as a gift to your pastor or to a family member and help extend truth and justice in the world. This is while supplies last. If a Western power, or let's use older language, if a Christian nation could break the back of a small Islamic nation that was raiding and committing acts of piracy and kidnapping and selling people as slaves, if a Christian nation or a Western power could in fact militarily break the back of such a nation for its crimes, should it do it? In a heartbeat. in a heartbeat. Yes. It's called just war. Now, Billy Bob, when we were off the air in the break, Billy Bob said to me, well, you said you're going to read from the Catholic Catechism. Why would us Protestants care what the Catholic Catechism says about just war? Excellent question, Billy Bob. Let me read to you from the Oregon State University website. It says, the history of the just war theory begins in the works of some important philosophers. Augustine provides a foundation for the just war theory in Western literature. Thomas Aquinas codified Augustine's reflections into the distinct criteria that remain the basis of the just war theory as it is used today. So for those of you who did not know, Augustine and Aquinas, they were both Catholic theologians. Their writings are still impacting the world today. And Protestants love Augustine, okay, because all of this was prior to the Reformation, and both Catholic and Orthodox theologians, the Orthodox after the Great Schism, these theologians dominated the field, friends. And you have great evangelical preachers, theologians since the Reformation who adore Augustine. So for those of you who suffer from an anti-Catholic bias, there's your answer. Now to the Catechism. What does it say? The strict conditions for legitimate defense by military force require rigorous consideration. The gravity of such a decision makes it subject to rigorous conditions of moral legitimacy. Would it be morally legitimate for us to fight Russia over Crimea? Okay. So here, according to the Catholic Catechism, and there are other people who use the just war theory and expand and contract it, mostly expand it, by the way. It's a great study. If you want to study just war theory, just stay away from Wikipedia and go and Bing or do a search on just war theory. You can keep yourself occupied for 2 or 3 hours and come out much richer intellectually. And you'll see the fingerprints of Augustine and Aquinas all over it. Anyway, here's what you have to have. At one and the same time, the damage inflicted by the aggressor on the nation or community of nations must be lasting, grave, and certain. Well, it fails right there on that point. The vote of the people of Crimea to rejoin the Russian Federation, even if you want to say that Russia annexed Crimea, okay, which I don't believe happened, but even if you want to say that, is the damage inflicted by Russia on Crimea or the community of nations lasting, grave, and certain? No. Look at the pictures. Look at these people cheering, laughing. These are Russians, okay? They have been a part, the Crimea has been a part historically of Russia for over 200 years, mostly. And they want to go home, friend, comrade. All other means of putting an end to it must have been shown impractical or ineffective. Fails on that one. There must be serious prospects of success. The West cannot fight Russia for Crimea, all right? Unless we want to get into some type of nuclear holocaust, which is not going to happen. The use of arms must not produce evils and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated. The power of modern means of destruction weighs very heavily in evaluating this condition. Clearly, we're not going to invade Crimea, all right? The destruction of that area over war, of actual shooting war, would be so horrific that it would invalidate anything that we would hope to gain. So there is no righteous, just war looking at us, all right? But I will say this, I've got to take a break, and we'll cover it when we come back. There is hypocrisy. While we're on the break, I want you to think, annexation, where did I hear that before? Did America ever do that to anyone? Did we ever do that? Do we have any blood on our hands? I don't know. We'll have to find out from the voice of resistance. Do you want to get America out of the hands of wicked and unjust men and women who are destroying the republic before our eyes, and put leadership back into the hands of righteous men and women so that we don't die as a nation? Well, you're talking about social revolution. And there are rules in social revolution. We can look at the victorious social revolutions of the past, such as the end of slavery, the end of child labor, women's voting rights, the end of segregation, and so much more, and learn from their victories. Look at their actions, their images, their rhetoric, their sacrifices, and their final fruit. We will send you this series that originally cost $129, 7 books for students, 1 teacher's guide, if you'll give a gift of any size and just pay for shipping and handling. Take advantage of it today. As many of us focus on Crimea, one thing that we should bear in mind is that there has been very, very little violence, very little bloodshed. And clearly, a majority of Crimeans want to be a part of Russia. If you look at some of the other secessionist movements in the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years, this one has been pretty peaceful. I mean, consider South Sudan. After years, decades of fighting, I think it was July of 2011, they put it to a vote in South Sudan. Should it become a free country? The United Nations recognized the country, and after unthinkable, horrific bloodshed with northern Muslims attacking southern Christians and then reprisal attacks from the Christians, Sudan was split in half, and the Christian majority of the South, after long bloody battles, had a vote and prevailed. All right? So what happened in Crimea was pretty tame. But I want to go a step further, just to give pause and to give light to the hypocrisy of our own country. Did you know that there was a nation called the Republic of West Florida? In 1810, if my memory is correct, there were a group of people that fought. They were mostly English and Scottish, and they fought against Spain to get a part of what is Baton Rouge, Red Stick, all right, and some tracts of land that were not a part of the Louisiana Purchase. They prevailed. They got a constitution. And President Madison said, I don't think so. We want that land. We want it to be a part of America. And there were people in the Republic of West Florida that ultimately did want to become a part of the United States, but they wanted to do it with the rule of law, not the barrel of a gun. But Madison sent in the American army and just literally took it. Think about President Andrew Jackson. One of the most horrific crimes ever committed in the United States of America is now known historically as the Trail of Tears. The Cherokee Nation existed, okay? And in Worcester versus Georgia, the Supreme Court ruled that yes, there is a Cherokee Nation. They do have sovereignty. They have a treaty. We're going to honor it. And Jackson said they made their ruling. Now let them enforce it. And for gold and for land, we drove 17,000, more or less, men, women, and children from their homes. 4,000 of them died along the way. And then finally, Hawaii. There was a secessionist movement. There was a group of people in Hawaii who wanted to be a part of the United States, but most of them didn't. And they had this huge petition that they signed in the mid-1890s, and it killed the effort to just take Hawaii in. But then when the Spanish-American War broke out, and we were fighting in the Philippines and in Cuba, President McKinley just said, we're taking it. And they literally just took Hawaii because we needed a naval base. Does it sound like Crimea to you? The Russians need a naval base? They've got a naval base? We took Hawaii. There are still Hawaiians to this day who assert that Hawaii is a free people and they're working for independence. So before we wring our hands and cry foul in Crimea, we should maybe look at the blood that's on our own hands, the Trail of Tears, the theft of Hawaii. This is the voice of resistance. you.